As we await catastrophe, prepare. Welcome to Law and Society. Please subscribe. We now live in a world that is far more uncertain than it was even 6 months ago. Americans now have a waiting game ahead of us. As Donald's new law rolls out its different directives, we'll start seeing its impact on communities throughout the country. And it will impact the world as well. First, I want to tell you about the police state. So, exponential funding increase in the Department of Homeland Security will rapidly increase the number of private prisons, government contracts with these prisons, as well as the formation of supplemental law enforcement corps of officers. And it very well may be that some of them could be the most zealous January 6th insurrectionists. We won't know. In building a federal police state that premises itself on immigration and customs enforcement. But it will not limit itself to immigrants. When you get to remove people illegally and disappear them without due process of law, even before getting congressional consent, getting that congressional consent through funding will only see this process blow up in size and scope. Human rights attorneys and groups will have a lot on their hands in the coming months and years. I would say they would have to challenge the ICE raids, demand IDs and warrants, investigate those raids. State and local authorities have that responsibility of investigating and challenging the constitutionality of Donald Trump's April 28th executive orders. Because those orders don't fall within the president's core powers to come into states and commandeer state and local authorities or to police states under the auspices of immigration and customs enforcement, when we know now that many who are not even part of the ICE system, even legal residents and even citizens are getting tangled up in what Donald Trump is bringing upon the country. So we know that Kilmar Abrego Garcia is back in the United States. He said that he was tortured in the CCOT prison, and he has sued the government on that record. The most recent case about Garcia is that Judge Sinis, remember, she was the first court that said bring him back, now has a hearing that has to talk about what the government plans to do should Judge Sinis order his release to the Marshal Service, because the government keeps threatening that they're going to illegally remove Abrego Garcia again should he be released. And that has called for a plea from Abrego Garcia's lawyers saying keep him in federal custody in lieu of the trial that is happening in Tennessee, because otherwise the police state is going to disappear him again. A reminder for all of us that we still don't know what over 200 of these people who were illegally removed to CCOT and then some to Sudan, where they are, what their positions are, where are they getting due process of law, how are they alive? We don't know anything about that. And federal courts are still holding the line on that and trying to hold this particular regime, Donald's regime, accountable, but it is putting, the regime is putting so much pressure on the lower courts by simply not listening to the courts and sidestepping the courts and sort of being as slippery as they possibly can be. But I think that it would help if states were to investigate and sue the federal government for this expansion of the police state and those police state orders, I think that will have a big impact in pulling back and checking federal power. So if to look at the constitutionality of the raids, the legitimacy of the officers in the new ICE Corps, and the constitutionality of the executive orders, because they're not about president's core powers. The president's core power is to take care that the laws be faithfully executed, and those are federal laws. And the federal executive does not have power to commandeer local and state authorities. And state sovereignty gives states the position to challenge this usurpation of state powers, as well as constitutional rights that are being defied by this particular regime. Then let's talk about the massive cuts to Medicaid, which are about exactly the same as the tax cuts that are being made permanent for the ultra rich. But the massive Medicaid tax cuts will have a far-flung impact throughout the country, mainly in poor rural areas and inner city populations that rely on federal assistance programs. And it is, you don't think that it would hit you personally, but it just came to my notice that the hospital that is the only serving hospital in the town where I grew up, in Danville, Illinois, is slated to close. It's a hospital where my stepfather practiced for decades. It's a hospital where I had my first surgery. And to think that that hospital would be gone gives me this really heavy sinking feeling, because in order for any emergency services, the people of that area have to now go and travel 40 minutes or 45 minutes to Champaign, Illinois, or if they're going to Indiana if there are emergency services wherever there's a hospital there. It will harm people. It will cause people to die from preventable deaths. Then there's cuts to the Supplemental Nutrition Assistance Program, which is SNAP. And it is going to harm countless children, the cuts that are going to be implemented. And I say going to be, remember that everything from rolling out this police state to cutting off SNAP, to cutting Medicaid, to cutting gutting and shutting down rural hospitals are going to happen in a sort of a slow bleed way, so as to not shock the populace. And a lot of these implementations will take full form after the midterm elections of 2026. And at that point, we will not be able to repair the damage. Right now, if there are lawsuits against these executive orders, and there are lawsuits challenging even the legislation that is depriving Americans of their basic health care and food assistance and other services, the people will not be able to grasp at what's happening, because it's not going to happen all at once. And it'll come in waves, and the people it'll be obfuscated, and they're going to try to, pawn it off on other reasons. And we're seeing that already with the huge tragedy that has taken place in Texas with the floodings. The tax cut on the rich are being made permanent. But there's a provision in the law that provides tax cuts to seniors that is not permanent. And there's any tax cuts that are provided to the lower income group is not permanent. And if you look at all the benefits that are being cut for the lower income groups, they will end up losing monetary benefit as opposed to gaining monetary benefit for the ultra rich who are not even going to notice this money that is being given to them. Then there's the cuts to the weather service. This Texas disaster is going to be a measure of how the DHS and under Kristi Noem and the Federal Emergency Management Assistance Program, how that will help states, because Donald Trump wants to take away FEMA. And the excuses that the GOP have are something along the lines of the people didn't want an alarm system. They didn't want that tax hike. So you blame the tax people. You hear Kristi Noem and Donald Trump talking about what could have caused this and that. Now is the time to give federal help to Texas without talking about what you could have done. We already know what you could have done. You could have not cut those National Weather Service staff and gut other weather programs. So, a chunk of these experts are gone, and therefore the process is not streamlined anymore. Then you have cuts to education. Attacks on the trans community. We saw with SCOTUS's help that the trans community has the lowest constitutional protection you can think of in the context of schools, in the context of sports, and in this instance, for the case, it was in the instance of health care for the trans people. But in terms of education, there's an attack not only on the education budgets of state schools that will be cut, but also cuts on universities and research, attacks on free speech, student loan changes that are all going to roll out in 2026. And it's going to slowly put a pinch on the American people. Cuts to the NIH research will push back our progress and American scientific progress decades. There's already a brain drain happening because of pressure on these institutions, these research institutions, and these institutions of health. Cuts to the CDC and the Health and Human Services are going to have a larger impact, negative impact, on the fact that we now have a measles outbreak in the United States that we haven't had in 30 plus years. At the same side as Donald Trump and Donald Trump's departments cutting preventative medicine programs, including for HIV/AIDS and measles. Making cuts to the VA staff that takes care of our veterans is another thing. And that our veterans give their lives, many have given their lives, and many are wounded and have life-altering injuries, both mental and physical and psychological, and you're going to cut their benefits? Then there's cuts to renewable subsidies. Then they're putting more effort into bringing back fossil fuels and therefore poisoning the air and the water even more, while cutting EPA regulations, air and water quality measurements in lower income group areas because they're no longer being monitored. There's going to be an increase in the military budget, and we know that there's this trans ban in the military that is going to come up through the courts. And with the court's recent trans decision, you get to see how low of a deference this court would give to trans people, even in the context of the military, unless they find the rationale for the trans ban to be unconstitutional. We don't know what's going to happen in that context. Then there's the cuts to the Social Security Administration and the personnel who take care of the Social Security Administration moving at the pace that it was moving before all these cuts, which was already delayed and they were already short-staffed. And now that's going to be harder for the poor to access these government services because a lot of them are not going to be feasible and it's going to be like they're going to have to wait for months to get responses for whether they've been approved for Social Security, whether they're getting their checks or not. Then there is the ban of the other countries that Donald Trump has implemented. Canceling protected status for Hondurans and Haitians. And that's happening, imposing these will allow ICE agents to indiscriminately go into these areas and start detaining and illegally removing these people. It's very likely that they will not enforce the ICE provisions, give these people time to be heard in court and their asylums be heard on an individual basis. It's like more likely in this environment that Donald will sic his ICE Corps on these people. They're even thinking about denaturalization, which there's precedent before that for people who have lied during the immigration process, like former Nazi soldiers and people of the Nazi regime who lied to be able to come to the United States. But in this instance, Donald Trump is going after birthright citizenship, and that's a whole nother topic. And he's going after constitutional provisions. So to have the Supreme Court also join Donald Trump in sort of sidestepping the birthright citizenship case and ordering that the order be limited only to the plaintiffs in the case, gave this huge support to Donald Trump, saying, go ahead and continue your illegal activities. We'll deal with it later when it comes up to us. Despite the fact that it is on the face violation of constitutional provision in the 14th Amendment of birthright citizenship. Then we have the tariffs and the trade wars that are happening. They've now announced 2 trade deals when they were supposed to announce 90 trade deals in 90 days. That hasn't happened. Donald Trump has already put a stay on the tariff imposition again until August 1st. So Trump always chickens out, even if it is just a small taco like a taquito. So the dollar remains volatile and the markets remain volatile because of this uncertainty. And in the midst of that, the law has these tax cuts being put into the being made permanent for the ultra rich, then taking money out of Medicaid to pay for that, then increasing the federal debt by billions of dollars, by trillions of dollars with a T, $3.5 trillion, because it's also increasing funding in defense, and it is exponentially increasing funding in ICE. So those have to come from somewhere, and that's why you blow up the national debt. You have a continuing attack on the press, on suing the press and forcing them to capitulate to a point where you can't even, and Donald's doing that by even threatening to cut off access and cutting off access as they have done with Associated Press. And now you really wonder whether corporate media is the free press or not. I don't believe it is. I believe that Associated Press, which is battling the government to maintain the freedom of press, which is in our First Amendment to our Constitution, and that is causing this attack on the press is causing a chaos in the information industry and in getting the truth out to people, because there are 100 different versions of the same thing being spun out by different corporate media. So you have to go to independent media like Bulwark, like Heather Cox Richardson, like Judge Luttig, like Midas Touch, like, did I say Bulwark? Bulwark is pretty good. You go for NPR, you go to any other independent journalists like Katie Couric and Joy Reid and Jim Acosta and Charlie Sykes, and there's just so many of them. And you have to go find the truth now instead of relying on a newspaper to tell you the truth, or relying on U.S. News or Washington Post to tell you the truth. And you have to look at how New York Times phrases their entire piece so as to not get blowback from the administration, this regime, because it is an authoritarian regime. We are living in an authoritarian regime. We have to accept that. We are now wading through constitutional crises after constitutional crises. So let's not belittle the constitutional crisis that we are in the middle of. It's a mega crisis where there's a compliant Supreme Court that not only gave Donald Trump immunity, but also in equitable relief sided with Donald Trump in cases of birthright citizenship, which is a core right vested to the American people at birth if they are born in the United States. So this compliant Supreme Court that gave Donald immunity, along with a Congress that has now given him all the money he needs to create a police state, is going to cause suffering and is going to make the lives of the poor in the country unbearable. And these threats is not just designed to undermine the American population, but to sabotage the American government in such a way as the domestic population is just broken and divided, and there's chaos, and the government essentially is not taking care of what it needs to take care of. And we today do have a functional unitary executive who is sending out, militarizing National Guards and sending them out to different parts of the country. And even Marines. Marines have no civilian duties. They have no civilian capacity. They are warriors. And if we are seeing Marine on the streets of the United States, in civilian streets now, before Donald Trump fully unfurls his police state, for which he just got all the funding he needs, you can only imagine what's going to happen when he gets that funding in hand. So with that said, I will keep on reminding you and warning you when these provisions come into effect individually, but I wanted to make this video a warning video to let you know that it's not all going to happen in one fell swoop. It's going to come in waves, and it's designed to obfuscate from the elections and from people getting angry about losing their benefits. Although that will happen, because even before these policies are being implemented, we are seeing farms and schools and small companies being crushed. We're seeing schools losing their funding for food. We're seeing farms losing their funding for providing food to those schools, as well as for the improvements they've made on their farms. We're seeing this, the fallout from the MAGA agenda, Donald Trump's agenda, already wreaking havoc all over the country, and it will only increase. And I'm not happy to bring you this news, but it is what I see coming, and I wanted to warn you. With that said, thank you so much for listening. If you like what you hear, please like and subscribe, and please share with others so they are also aware of what's coming. Thank you very much, and I'll talk to you soon.